Let me cite the case of Dr. J. He was the only man I ever encountered in my whole life whom I would dare to call a Mephistophelian being, a satanic figure. At that time, he was generally called the mass murderer of Steinhof, the large mental hospital in Vienna. When the Nazis started their euthanasia program, he held all the strings in his hands and was so fanatic in the job assigned to him that he tried not to let one single psychotic individual escape the gas chamber. After the war, when I came back to Vienna, I asked what had happened to Dr. J. He had been imprisoned by the Russians in one of the isolation cells of the Steinhof. They told me. The next day, however, the door of his cell stood open and Dr. J was never seen again. Later, I was convinced that, like others, he had, with the help of his comrades, made his way to South America. More recently, however, I was consulted by a former Australian diplomat who had been imprisoned behind the Iron Curtain for many years, first in Siberia and then in the famous Lubyanka prison in Moscow. While I was examining him neurologically, he suddenly asked me whether I happened to know Dr. G. After my affirmative reply, he continued, I made his acquaintance in Lubyanka. There he died at about the age of 40 from cancer of the urinary bladder. Before he died, however, he showed himself to be the best comrade you can imagine. He gave consolation to everybody. He lived up to the highest conceivable moral standard. He was the best friend I ever met during my long years in prison. This is a story of Dr. J, the mass murderer of Steinhoff. How can we dare to predict the behavior of man? We may predict the movements of a machine, of an automaton. More than this, we may even try to predict the mechanisms or dynamisms of the human psyche as well. But man is a more than psyche. Freedom, however, is not the last word. Freedom is only part of the story and half of the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole phenomenon, whose positive aspect is responsibleness. In fact, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. That is why I recommend that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast.